And now we turn to our Android Basics section, and we continue our tour of the passwords and account settings, and picking up the autofill story from last week. And it's Google autofill. Warren, I know you've recorded anything. Is there anything you want to say by way of preface before we play that?
So we come to this section, and of course, last week we talked about this autofill section, and we didn't get to its settings. So, in other words, what we're talking about this week is the settings to the autofill that contains a number of things, very important things. And that's what I have recorded the preamble for. And so, here's that preamble. And when we're done, then we'll go ahead and talk about the things that I have mentioned here in the settings to the autofill settings. I am now in the password and accounts area, and as we indicated, we're talking about the settings of the autofill. This time we're talking about the Google. And so we're looking at the settings of the Google autofill. Here's the area that I'm talking about.
Autofill service heading.
And then below that we have
Google.
And to the right of that is the item we want to talk about, and that is the settings.
Settings button.
I'll tab here and we'll go through the items here, and when I'm done, I'll turn you over to the podcast crew as they dissect this area.
Autofill with Google. Navigate up button out of list.
We hear autofill with Google, navigate to top, found there at the top left corner. I'll move my finger down from here and see what we have.
Use autofill with Google, switch on in list.
And we hear use autofill service with Google, and there's a switch to the right there that is turned on by default. Moving my finger down.
Personal information.
These are the areas or some of the items that you can go in and input your information. So we got personal information.
Addresses.
Addresses. That means if you go in here, you could add your address and things like that. Below that, we've got
payment methods.
Payment methods. And that has to do with things like credit cards and all of that. Next.
Passwords.
Passwords. And those are the ones we talked about last week. Next.
Debug settings.
We have the debug settings. Below that, though, we've got
preferences, security, display, and sync.
Preferences, security, display, and sync. And that's the last item. Let's go ahead and tap on this preferences, display, sync, and all of that.
Authentication required. Tap to cancel authentication button out of list.
Upon tapping on that, we are asked to authenticate. And if you have a fingerprint reader on, then you'll use your fingerprint reader. And if you didn't have one, then you could use your PIN to authenticate. I'll put my finger down on the fingerprint to authenticate this session.
Authenticated. Tap to cancel authentication button. Autofill with Google. Preferences.
Now we're on the page with the preferences. Putting my finger near the top, here are the things that we find.
Authenticate with biometrics before filling payment cards. Switch on in list.
We hear the first item that says authenticate with fingerprint before using cards, and that one is on. Below that we got
authenticate with biometrics before filling passwords. Switch off.
To authenticate before inputting password, that one is turned off. So if you want to do that, in other words, if you want the biometrics to come up every time you want to put in a password or something like that, then you enable that. Let's keep going.
Sync heading.
Now we get to the sync heading, and this is probably one of the most important here as well. Here's what we got.
Sync preferences. Use preferences on other devices with your Google account. Switch on.
So in other words, if I have this turned on, it means all the passwords and everything else will be synced across my other devices. If I turn this off, however, it means it will only be available on this device. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm going to tap here so you hear what I'm talking about.
Dialog icon. Turn off sync, out of list.
And
This device will stop syncing autofill preferences. Previous preferences won't be automatically deleted.
below that,
Delete all synced preferences. Checkbox, not checked.
we have a checkbox to delete all sync preferences or not. Next,
Cancel, button.
we have the cancel, and to the right of that,
Turn off, button.
the turn off. I'm not going to do that because I want to have that ability to have the same feature on my other devices. Therefore, I will tap on cancel.
Cancel, button. Autofill with Google. Sync preferences. Use preferences on other devices with your Google account. Switch on in list.
And now I'll go back to the previous screen where we were.
Autofill with Google. Preferences, security, display, and sync in list.
And I am back to that last item. I'll now go back to the previous screen.
Passwords and accounts. Settings, button in list.
And that was the settings for the autofill service. I'll now hand you over to the podcast crew as we talk about these items and see what we like and what we don't like.
Thank you, Warren. I got to say, I use this fairly extensively. I have most of it populated, certainly the personal information, the addresses, and the payment methods, although I do definitely use that authentication before the payment methods can get populated. It sounds from that recording, Warren, that you do use autofill because you're quite keen that it stays synced across devices.
I do use it, ostensibly because it's my preferred. I mean, like I've indicated last week, I do have Dashlane. However, with Dashlane, you have to pay in order to have that cross-device, support and all of that. And so I have just switched to, the Google one. I used to pay the monthly, no, not monthly, annual thing for Dashlane. And I think I've mentioned it here that they said we could not see you on there. Meanwhile, I was being charged from the Play Store. And so finally, when I told Google to refund my money and Google went to bat for me and got me back my money, then these guys came back later on and said, oh, we discovered what was wrong. We'll give you half the price. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. So this one works for me. And frankly, if it's El Fribo for me, I'll keep it El Fribo. And like we talked about last week, you can decide to not even have anything to do with the Google Cloud. It can only be on device only. The problem is that you have to make sure you remember your stuff, because if you lose that, then you are in big water. No one can recover. But like you said, Ed, I like that ability to have my things cross-syncing with each other. And I could pick this other device or whatever device, or when I have a new device, and as long as I sign into the same account, my autofill stuff is on that new device. And that's what I really like. I don't have to have something say, here's the master key. I need to do this before I could access that. And that's part of the problem with Dashlane and the likes of Dashlane. I had forgotten what that master password was one time, and I had to create a brand new account because no one could help me. So that's the problem.
Yeah. And how does this compare to the Chrome thing? Is this different, or will anything in here show up in Chrome as well?
It will show up in Chrome as well. But if you decide to do the not to only be on device only and not sync with other devices, then if I have a Chrome on my computer or on another phone, I'm not going to get that autofill or that same information that I have on the phone that I'm working with. However, the things that have been synced earlier on will remain unless, of course, you go in there and actually just wash them out, so to speak. But other than that, things that you have in the past will be on those other devices, but any new additional things that you add will not transfer to those if you choose to only use that on device.
Makes sense. Fee, do you use these? Do you use autofills for stuff like this?
Yeah, I do, but I'll be honest, I don't often go into the settings. But yeah, I do, although I tend to use the Samsung version, but it's all very, very similar. And yeah, I just do my my fingerprint rather than having to remember all the passwords, as we were talking about last week. It's much easier. But yeah, it's interesting hearing Warren go through the settings, because although they're there, I haven't basically, it's worked, so I haven't needed to go into the settings. But yeah, I definitely use it, pretty regularly, actually, for shopping apps and things like that. Yeah, it's very good. But
Yeah.
it works well.
And I guess that's what you want. You don't really want to have to be bothering with settings, isn't it? You want hopefully the default
Exactly.
works. But it's good
If
to
I
know
have
what
to
you've
keep
got.
going into settings and mucking about, to me, that's not very. That's kind of annoying, It's good that you can, but it's nice when you don't need to, because it works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
you
about
don't
you,
need to
John?
go to the settings. One really doesn't need to go to the settings unless, of course, you want to do some finer management and things like that, as we discussed earlier on. But the whole idea is to let one know that it is there. So if you want to manual something, you can go in here as well in these settings. And Fee, you mentioned something about shopping, and that's where that beauty of the autofill shines, because I don't have to be filling out all those long forms, first name, last name, address, zip code, all that can get a
Yeah,
little,
that's
jarring
annoying,
after
isn't
a
it?
while.
Yeah.
So I love autofill for that. And most especially if I'm trying to sign into an app, the thing is already there. I don't need to, like you said, muck around when trying to enter all of those information in there. So I like that autofill.
It's good,
What I
isn't it?
have
Yeah.
discovered on addresses is that if forms have slightly different layouts, autofill can acquire slightly different versions of your address if you're not careful. So you might want to go in and clear it out occasionally, because you might find you've got slightly weird variants on your address.
Yeah, I have had to do that before, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most especially if you've lived in several places, because I moved a lot earlier on in life. So, I moved from Denver to Washington State. So, and here in the state of Washington, I moved maybe like 3 or so times. And, I could see my other addresses, but that's what I'm talking about. You can go into these settings where you manage such addresses, delete the ones that you no longer have association to, and that's where that settings comes in handy.
Yeah. I even had
Yeah,
2 or 3 variants of my current address though,
I
because
was,
of
I
the
was
way.
just going to say, you don't even have to have moved sometimes with some of the companies and the way they, like,
That's right.
I live in a flat that's in a house that's been converted into 5 flats. So there's the flat number, so flat something, and then there's number whatever, and then my road. And some forms let you put flat X first, but other ones won't. They'll only let you put the house address first, and then afterwards they'll say flat or building, and it mangles your address a bit, but their system doesn't understand it any other way. So you do have to be careful with that. It's a bit
Yeah.
annoying.
And then you get weird autofill entries created on the back of it, which you may or may not want.
Yeah.
Always good to clear those out occasionally.
And I see
John,
what you guys are talking about because I
Yeah.
think Amazon is guilty for that. And there's another company that I'll see multiple entries of my address. So I know exactly what you guys are talking about. But, some shopping sites do that for some reason. Amazon, I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Yes,
John
I'll
Boy,
tell
are
you
you an
who
autofiller?
did it with me. It was Boots, the chemist in this
Yeah.
country. Doing your address on their website is, it was. I'll never get that time back. It was really annoying.
You'll never make up that time back with Boots, will you?
Oh, makeup, very good. Yeah.
You
That
make
joke
up
was
you
pure.
make up such time when you are on Boot Hill.
Yeah, that joke was purely cosmetic.
Yes, Ed, very good. I was ordering some perfume
Oh,
rather than makeup, and the order didn't work, and I didn't know why. I'd sorted it out eventually, but working out what on earth was wrong was one, because the other thing is, I think a lot of the time if the field hasn't worked, it's red or something, something we can't see anyway to indicate that field's wrong or something. It doesn't often tell you in just normal text, can't accept this type of thing or whatever. It just doesn't work when you submit. It's like, really annoying. Anyway,
Yeah.
I got there in the end.
John, do you use autofill?
Yeah, I do use it, and I haven't changed much of the settings. I pretty much kept the defaults because, I do want it to sync. That's kind of the whole point in using it, is to have it sync to other devices, especially as often as I change devices. So, yeah, I definitely have that enabled. And as far as like the fingerprint, I have that enabled for the payments, like putting in payment methods. And I don't know if you can even turn that off, but I do have it turned off for just regular passwords and stuff. I figure if I'm already signed in to my phone, like, you don't need to ask me for my fingerprint for that. But for the payment methods, yeah, I'll do my fingerprint.
Yeah, I agree with Warren on those master passwords. It's almost, what's the point? I might as well just key in the password for the site I'm on. That's a slight flaw in some of those password managers or on-device things. Much better not to have to do that, I think.
While I'm sitting here hearing you guys, and a thought came into my mind, talking about those multiple address entries. And I'm kind of wondering, though, if these things are actually not created by adding additional cards. For example, I go to Amazon and I have my Discover card on there. I have my MasterCard and I have my Visa card. And so every time you enter those things on there, they create their own entry. And I'm thinking that probably could be the reason why we see these multiple address entries.
What's quite interesting is I added a card in autofill or in Google Wallet today, and it wouldn't let me autofill the address from autofill. It just didn't come up. It made me create a new address. I thought that was quite ironic.
How odd.
Yeah, there was no autofill.
Yeah, so see, if you entered the address manually, now you have multiple
Probably
addresses.
another one. I've got another
Exactly.
instance of my address.
So I
Yeah,
think
great.
the fault is coming from adding another card, and we should have no reason to type in our address. Since my address is there, why not just grab that address? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense at all. So I think that's why we see those multiple address entries is from adding more than one card.
Yeah. So it will come from form sometimes, though. If the form is custom and it won't properly autofill when you do it, and it'll resave your address. So yeah, cards are definitely a culprit, though.